Ingraham. This is the Ingraham Angle from Washington tonight. Happy Valentine's Day, and thank you for joining us. All right, speaking in Munich today, JD Vance gave our European allies a much-needed wake-up call. It was really a 180-degree departure from Biden's weak and wasteful, we're going to give you anything you want approach to Europe. So calling out the EU's increasing hostility to free speech, Vance was refreshingly blunt.
If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens.
Yeah, this novel concept where you actually listen to the needs and concerns of your own people. That's what Donald Trump's doing here in the United States. The European leaders need to do the same thing. So they wanted him to speak about Russia and China. And the threat here is not so much Russia and China, it's yourselves and your own approach to these issues. But I think my favorite part of the speech was when the cameras panned to the audience, the face of the elites that were used to getting their way and taking us all for fools.
We may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing.
Like, what do you mean the voice of the people matter? We're used to running the show. But this was a deeply pro-American speech because we don't apologize for who we are or what we believe. Oh, President Obama kind of did that during his first European tour, but that's not us.
And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. The government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
And he's right about that. Now, one of the most powerful parts of Vance's address today were his comments on the self-harm that Europe has done to itself to satisfy the mythical global order.
I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration.
Now, what he's getting at there is that Europe and their elites there, their old cabals, tried everything they could, everything in their power to malign and defame and sometimes even jail its populist movements, populist leaders. But Vance perfectly assessed where this will lead.
But what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered.
And this is how the MAGA folks felt for years, even before they were called MAGA, before there was a Donald Trump on the political scene. They felt ignored, they felt dismissed, looked down upon. But eventually, the people will have their say. And today, JD Vance did America proud and having the brains and, frankly, the guts to tell the truth to those who presided over Europe's steady decline. Joining us now, Glenn Greenwald, Pulitzer Prize-winning independent journalist. Glenn, what I love are reading the comments from those back in the United States. Politico today basically saying that JD Vance attacked our European allies, attacked them by focusing on the cultural issues like free speech instead of focusing on how we need to, I guess, I don't know, spend billions of dollars more in continuing the killing fields in Ukraine.
If you go back and look at when the real hostility toward Donald Trump really emerged from establishment media and establishment politics, it was when he began questioning the foundational premises, the orthodoxies, almost the religious pieties of Washington when it comes to foreign policy, particularly when it comes to our relationship to Europe. Why is it that we continue to pay for Europe's defense when the original purpose of NATO, which was protecting it against the Soviet Union, obviously doesn't exist anymore because there is no more communist Soviet Union wanting to invade Western Europe. And so many of these premises that have been off limits from debate for so long and yet have created so much destruction. These are the things that have got us into the wars, including regime change in Libya at NATO's demand, into Syria, this destructive regime change there. All throughout the world, these wars and this massive expenditure of military spending that comes at the expense of the American people, all of it's now being questioned because the foundational ideas and premises of it are completely false. The idea that the United States and the EU work together to promote democracy when so much of what the EU does is anti-democratic, from canceling elections when it dislikes the outcome or censoring their political speech. It was amazing to hear JD Vance go and tell them that in such blunt and unapologetic ways.
No, Glenn, I'm sorry, but I just kept going back on the computer, on my feed, to look at the faces. The faces always tell the story. They loved it when Obama went over and said we're dismissive and derisive and we're arrogant. They love that. They loved Obama, obviously, for a lot of reasons. He was a powerful politician, but they love the idea of America kind of being on her knees. But in this case, JD Vance had just a different approach. Let's watch more.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now,
your reaction to that, because again, the global security conference that was taking place, we're urgently hoping that he corrected the record on what Hegseth had said earlier about Russia and Ukraine, and that it was going to be more of doubling down on failure in the war in Ukraine. And like, wait a second, why are you talking about free speech? Get on with what really matters.
Yeah, and I mean, what he's saying there is so true. If you wake up as an American citizen or as a citizen of Germany or France or the UK, you're not really worried about Russia. You're not worried about China. These are the things that we've learned. The Democrats and the media tried for years to say, Russia, you're scared of Russia. You can't vote for Trump. That isn't what people wake up and think about. They wake up and think about their economic security that's threatened by a lot of these policies that their own governments have implemented, and about their freedoms to say the things that they were always taught they had the right to say. And so when you have Europe basically adopting a posture of authoritarianism, of internal repression, because they're afraid of their own people and they're afraid of the outcome of free elections, and we're supposed to base our foreign policy and our security on a partnership with them, when we have our own forces inside the United States that have been doing the same thing, that kind of censorship, that attempt to manipulate elections, these are the real threats, the most proximate and immediate threats. And again, it's amazing to hear a senior American leader say, it's not China and Russia that's threatening our way of life, at least not immediately. It's people within our own countries, the ones who have governing these countries in a way that have turned so many people off.
Now, I mean, if they had been successful, there wouldn't be the rise of a populist movement, right? I mean, if the elites had done a better job, there wouldn't have been a Donald Trump. So they only have themselves to blame here. But Germany's Minister of Defense, Glenn, did come out to respond to Vice President Vance's speech. Check it out.
He spoke of the annihilation of democracy, and, if I understood him correctly, he compared conditions in parts of Europe with those in authoritarian regimes. And that is why I strongly oppose the impression that Vice President Vance has created, that minorities are being suppressed or silenced in our democracy.
Glenn, they took great umbrage to what he said? And before that, this idea that, you know, Ukraine was not going to become a member of NATO, they were upset about that.
I think the key, which is what you asked in your question, is the fact that the only reason we have populist movements in Europe and the United States, around the world, is because these institutions have failed. They've lost control of how people perceive them. They have no more faith or trust of the people that they want to rule over. And the amazing thing, Laura, is that you never hear them look in the mirror and ask why that is. What is it that they did that caused it? The only thing they want to do is blame, oh, it's Russia deceiving our people. It's too much dissent and hate speech and misinformation tricking people into not liking us. And so for JD Vance to go and say, no, you know what, actually a lot of this is your fault, that's what really makes them so angry and alarmed, because that is the truth and they don't want anyone pointing that out.
Yeah, and Glenn, as he said, you know, friends don't let friends continue to traffic in lies and half-truths and censorship. But if you're friends, you have to give your friends sometimes friendly advice and constructive criticism. Glenn, great to have you on. We don't have you on enough. Thank you so much.